First of all, let me talk about family camp. It's coming up next weekend. I want to encourage you all to go, and especially if you have any grandchildren or children that are 10 years old, because my son's coming, and he doesn't want to be around a bunch of old people. And he's told me that. Papa, are there going to be other kids there? Well, I don't know. I like to tell him that his grandmother tells me kids at my age are pretty fun to be with. But anyway, so I want to encourage you in family camp. My daughter, Amber, and her son, my grandson, live with us, and that's been a real life-changing event for Peg and I. My daughter struggles with a lot of things. She spends most of her time in her room, but family camp is one of those things where she'll get out with us. And I would encourage you to touch base with her. Don't tell her I shared this with you. She'll get me in a headlock, and I hate it when she does that. And then I'd like to give a shout out to a couple of my buddies. Dave Alternator, say that 3 times fast, and Kevin England. Now, in 1979 was my first year of teaching, and I was fortunate enough to be teaching at a place called Rennie Middle School in Newberg, Oregon. Peg and I are graduates out of George Fox, and so I got a job there. That was my first job, and that first 3 years that I taught, or 4 actually, counting the year I subbed 172 days the first year I was out, so normal school year for days with students, about 179, 180, so I taught just about full-time as a substitute, which was a great experience for me. But I got to know Kevin and Dave, and over the years, they have stayed in the Newberg area and continued their teaching. They're both retired as well as I am. But they stayed put. I kind of ran all over the state. You know, I've been out east in Vail, Oregon, by Ontario, Oregon, right on the Idaho-Oregon border. In fact, we're in the Mountain Time Zone over there. I was at Silverton for quite a few years. I finished up here in Walport. I was in Bend for quite a few years, and I was in Lapine for quite a few years. But throughout that time, the 3 of us have kept in contact. You men that are here, this is what I want to say to you. About a little over a year, Dave texted me on those phones we have, and he said, Les, would you be interested in doing a Bible devotional with me on a daily basis? So what's kind of neat about our new technology is we can stay connected in a positive way. Now, I'm not a big social media guy, but what we do is the 3 of us got a book called Daily Wisdom for Men, and we read it. It takes me about 5 minutes to read it. There's a scripture verse and something with it, and it takes me anywhere from 5 to 10, maybe at the very most 15 minutes of my morning, and it is an awesome way to start every morning. And we text back and forth for just a few minutes, just a few lines, about our thoughts on those matters. And we can communicate if one of us is having indigestion or whatever, we can let each other know about our problems. So I want to encourage you men here, find someone who you can be close to or you feel comfortable with sharing, and share a book together, a devotional. It'll change your life, and it has mine. About a little over a year ago, Dave was diagnosed with pulmonary fibrosis, which is your lungs become brittle inside. He's a very, very active man. He played basketball at George Fox. He has some records there. He's about 6'7". And he was just very active. We did tons of stuff with kids. He leads a lot of small groups, as does Kevin. But in the last year and a half, he's had to let people take care of him, and that's hard to do. So when you think of Dave, whisper a prayer that the Lord will be with him and his wife, Chris, as he goes through this very difficult time. So those are my 2 public announcements. Get a book and start reading. Now, I'm going to ask Buster if he would put up that map. Hopefully you have a map. I'm not sure. Yeah, it's not bad, but it's... we're going to get back into Mark Now, up to this point, Jesus has been kind of our leader through servitude. He's served people. He's helped people. My first time we talked about healing of a leopard, and we talked about how that we can relate that to our own lives. And then we talked about the feeding of the 5,000 the next time I spoke. Well, we're going to take a little bit of a turn now, and Jesus goes from that servant to someone who proclaims himself. And really, it's the first time in his public ministry that he does so. So I just want to, let's see, can you see that little dot there moving around? Yeah. I'm not shaking. It's just this is Capernaum. This is where he spent a lot of time around this area. And you may recall that I said that in this area during that time, there was 2 or 3 million people, and a lot of spread out around the Sea of Galilee. And he would travel from town to town, and he was sharing. Well, at this point, he travels down and goes over to this area called Perea. I hope I'm saying that right. Perea. And so he's now stepping into the final weeks, months of his life. And so we get this different, this different feeling from this chapter. It's really packed. As I was looking through it, I was wondering, how can I relate all this to me today? So I'm going to give it a shot. If you add up all the chapters in the 4 Gospels, you'll find that only 4 chapters are devoted to the first 30 years of Jesus' life. If you took all the chapters, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, you added them all up, you'd find 4 that deals with the first 30 years of his life. Okay? 85 chapters are giving over to describing his last 3.5 years. Of those 85 chapters, 29 give us an account of his final week on earth. Before his crucifixion, his death, his burial, and his resurrection. 13 of that 29 shows us the focal point of the Gospels, which is the last 24 hours of his life. And it shows us the supreme sacrifice that he was willing to make so that you and I could have a personal relationship with him. So that's part of what I'd like to talk about a little bit today. Now, as I was pointing out, we find that Jesus has been in the area called Perea of the Jordan River, crossed east of the Jordan River, and he traveled south to this area. And this area was controlled by a guy by the name of Herod of Antipas. Now, Herod of Antipas was the gentleman who beheaded John the Baptist. And there were Pharisees in that area, and they were hoping that Jesus might suffer the same fate. John the Baptist had gotten into a little trouble over divorce and marriage. You might say he lost his head about it. Sorry. That's my sick middle school humor. So the Pharisees go to Jesus and they ask him a question on marriage and divorce. They're going, let's see what happens here. Of course, Jesus just simply takes them back to when God created Adam and Eve and tells them that the Lord said, what he joins together, let no man put asunder, and they couldn't say anything about that. So he, at that point, travels from Perea back over the Jordan and through Jericho. And along the route, he encounters a couple blind men. He heals them. The most remembered man was a guy named Bartimaeus, but actually that means son of Timaeus, so we don't really know what the guy's name was, but he heals him. And he goes, again, he travels from the Perea area across, here's Jericho, right here, and they travel to the Mount of Olives. Here's the village of Bethany that we'll talk about. Here's the village of Bethphage. This is the Jericho Road. Now, the Dead Sea is 1,500 feet below sea level. The Mount of Olives is 2,600 feet above sea level. So think about that. In 15 miles approximately, he and his disciples went from 15,000 feet or 1,500 feet below sea level to 2,600 feet above sea level. So it's quite a trek. So I just want to get the feel for this. So he has traveled over this time to the Mount of Olives. And as they rise over it, they can see Jerusalem in front of them. Now, Jesus is going to be staying with some friends. You might recognize these friends. One of them is a very good friend. His name is Lazarus, because Jesus raised him from the dead, so I would think you'd be pretty close to that person, if he raised you from the dead. And they're his sisters, Lazarus' sisters, Mary and Martha. So, the first 11 verses of chapter 11, where we're going to be going today, are often referred to as a triumphal entry. It is where Jesus enters Jerusalem riding on a donkey or a colt of a donkey. Now, all of us have heard this story, or a lot of us have. So I'd like to read those first 11 verses for you. And I don't know if I sent over a slide that has those verses on it or not, Buster. I can't remember. Yeah, I guess so. As they approached Jerusalem and came to Bethphage and Bethany of the Mount of Olives, Jesus sent his two disciples, saying to them, "Go to the village ahead of you, and just as you enter it, you will find a colt tied there, which no one has ever ridden. Untie it, bring it here. If anyone asks you, 'Why are you doing this?' just say the Lord needs it, and we'll send it back here shortly." Well, they went and found a colt outside in the street, tied at a doorway. As they untied it, some people standing there asked, "Well, what are you doing untying that colt?" They answered as Jesus told them, and people let them go. Wow. I don't know about you, but if I was those two disciples, I'd be going, wow. It's too bad it doesn't work that way today. I mean, we could use a church van. Wouldn't it be nice if we could just go into the, car dealership and say, "The Lord needs it." Oh, yeah, here are the keys. Yeah, that ain't going to happen. When they brought the colt to Jesus and threw their cloaks over it, he sat on it. Many people spread their cloaks on the road, while others spread branches, and they had cut in the fields. Those who went ahead and those who shouted, "Hosanna!" Or they shouted, "Hosanna! Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Blessed is the coming kingdom of our father David. Hosanna in the highest." Jesus entered Jerusalem, went into the temple courts, but since it was already late, he went out to Bethany with the 12. So he looked around and left. We find out later what was going on when he was looking around, but he didn't do anything about it. That's one of the points I take away from this that I believe he's trying to teach me. Now, this particular event is shared in all four Gospels. That's not super common. You might find a lot of these things in 2, maybe 3, but to share it in all 4 means it's pretty important. Verily, verily, that's twice, I say unto you. Hey, listen up, Les. Verily, verily. Okay? Holy, holy, holy. Well, that's 3 times. This is 4. So I'm thinking, maybe I need to pay attention. Now, a lot of people call this the triumphal entry. So I did a lot of, when I was doing this, I did a lot of research on this stuff, read a lot of history books. I'm a history teacher by trade, and so my wife thinks it's extremely boring. That's why she's not here this morning. I'm teasing. She'll be here in the second service, or at least she better be. And so I did a lot of that. I did some work on botany. I had to do some botany work to figure out about plants. And geography, I studied some geography while I was doing it. But this triumphal entry, it's interesting because the Romans came up with the phrase triumphal entry. Now, the way the Romans did it was if you were a general or a king and you had a battle somewhere and you killed over 5,000 people, you earned a triumphal entry. That sounds a little gross to me, but that's what they did. So they would bring the general or king, they would put him in a golden chariot, and they would take him through the streets. Behind him would be his soldiers. Behind that would be all the treasures and the loot that they got, and behind that would be the prisoners and people they took. Apparently, if he killed 4,999, he didn't get the triumphal entry. Not sure how they figured that one out, but apparently they did. So, if you're a Roman citizen at the time and you were in Jerusalem, which is very possible, and you saw Jesus riding in on a donkey, and you saw this ragtag group of followers behind him who looked like they'd been on the road traveling from 1,500 feet below to 2,600 feet above, and you saw these peasants throwing their garments, and you heard something about a triumphal entry, you'd go, what? This isn't a triumphal entry. You got to be kidding me. Well, what's interesting is that this particular triumphal entry in you and I's life and in the life of the world is a much more significant triumphal entry than anything the Romans could have come up with. Because you see, Christ was triumphal over sin and death. He came in on that donkey, which, as those of you that study history know, that when a king came in on a steed or a war horse or a stallion, that was a celebration. That was a triumphal entry. If a king rode in on a donkey, that was a sign that they wanted peace. And of course, our Lord is the Prince of Peace. So, he rides in, he looks around, and he leaves. He goes back out to Bethany. Now, as I said, this triumphal entry was certainly much more significant than any other, but just to ease your mind, he actually did fulfill the Romans' requirements. Really? Les, how did he do that? Well, let's talk about that. In Acts 3 and 4, you'll find a story about Peter and John after the resurrection. They stayed in Jerusalem, where this had all taken place, and they were going into the temple during about 3 in the afternoon for prayer, and they come across this lame man. And they heal him. And there are thousands and thousands of people, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. Thousands and thousands of people there. And they see this. Wow. And they begin to preach. And they begin to tell all those people about Christ and what he's done for their lives. And you may remember it towards the end of the story, it says, and added to their number of believers was 5,000. Bingo. That's pretty amazing in my book. So Jesus wasn't celebrating 5,000 deaths. He was celebrating and putting forth 5,000 believers who were able to experience a personal relationship with him and everlasting life. Pretty amazing. Now, I always want to beat up on the Pharisees. It's kind of like when you watch a movie and there's a villain who you love to hate. It's kind of how I feel about the Pharisees. But I have to ask myself, Les, would you recognize Jesus today? Would you, I don't know. I hope I would. I think I would. But apparently the religious leaders of the day did not like him. They didn't appreciate what he was doing. And in fact, when 5,000 believers came to Christ that day, they got Peter and John and they put them in prison. They were a little bit frightened. They couldn't attack Jesus because he was resurrected at the time. And they were concerned about the people. But I'm surprised that the leaders of the day didn't recognize Jesus, because if you go back in Zechariah, which happened about 500 years prior to it, this is what's written there in Zechariah 9:9. I don't know if I have it. Oh, yeah, I do. Gee, you're good, Buster. Oh, it's Ryan. You're good, Ryan. Take back half of the bad things I've said about you, but only half. Rejoice greatly, daughter of Zion. Shout, daughter of Jerusalem. Sing, your king come to you, righteous and victorious, lowly and riding on a donkey, on a colt, a foal of a donkey. And the Pharisees didn't recognize that? Interesting. Interesting. Another thing that I found interesting was this. Listen to this again. Chapter 11, verses 2 and 3. Saying to them being the disciples, go to the village ahead of you, and just as you enter it, you will find a colt tied there, which no one has ever ridden. Untie it and bring it here. If anyone asks you, why are you doing this? Say, the Lord needs it. I thought when I was reading that, well, he created heaven and earth. Why would he need a colt? Does the Lord really need anything? I don't know. Again, sometimes my sense of humor is not very appropriate, but I just, why would he need a colt? Here's the thing. I don't know who was here in one of my last sessions that I visited with you, but I said, God, Jesus, is the manufacturer. Do you remember what we are? Distributors. We are the distributors. He has chosen a partnership with us, which is pretty amazing. I get to be in partnership with God. It's pretty amazing. I don't have to make anything. He's going to work through me to get his will done. I just have to be in the right place at the right time and close to him. And then he'll take care of the rest. So he has enlisted mankind throughout the ages to complete his work here on earth. It's interesting. You'll find that Jesus, the creator of heaven and earth, borrows a boat, borrows a house to live in, borrows an upper room to celebrate Passover, borrows a donkey, and finally borrows a tomb. Now, he knows he's not going to need that tomb. It's kind of like staying at Best Western for 2 or 3 nights. You're going to be out of there. He knows that. So let me ask you this. What do you have that God needs? Are you open to letting him work in your life? Well, I'm not very smart, Les, or I'm not good with people. Or as my father left when I was 7, and when I was 33, I finally met him again, and we were talking, and I had to ask him a lot of questions. Why did you leave? Why, what, yada, yada, yada. I have a lot of garbage I carry with me simply because of that whole part of my life. And anyway, he was a smoker. He had 3 cigarettes going at the time. Yeah, he had a couple in an ashtray that were still burning, and he was smoking, and he was like what do they say, like a cat on a hot tin roof. He was nervous. And what he said to me is, Les, I can't talk like you talk. I don't have the words that you have. Remember Moses? Get my brother Aaron. Remember that? That's what's awesome about our God. He'll take your weakness and demonstrate his strength through it. It's awesome. If you'd have said to me, Les, when you turn 70, you're going to be preaching on occasion, I would have laughed my head off. In what lifetime are you talking? Corinthians 1:27 and 28. But God chose what is foolish in the world to shame the wise. God chose what is weak in the world to shame the strong. God chose what is low and despised in the world, even things that are not, to bring to nothing things that are. Amazing. I'm in. That describes me to a T. Using the foolish to confound the wise. Don't you love it? Now we move on. The next day, now remember, they went in, they looked around, and then he left. The next day, as they were leaving Bethany, this is Mark 11:12 through 25, if you have your Bible, Jesus was hungry. This is an interesting story. Seeing in the distance a fig tree in leaf, he went to find out if it had any fruit. When he reached it, he found nothing but leaves, because it was not the season for figs. And he said to the tree, "May no one ever eat your fruit again." Wow. What if you were one of the disciples? Ew. You got something against fig trees, Lord? And the disciples heard him say it. We're going to come back to that. On reaching Jerusalem, Jesus entered the temple courts and began driving out those who were buying and selling there. He overturned the tables of the money changers and the benches of those selling doves, and would not allow anyone to carry merchandise through the temple courts. And he taught them, saying, "Is it not written, my house will be called a house of prayer for all nations"? I'm still in. But you've made it a den of robbers, a place where robbers can come and feel safe. The chief priests, as you can imagine, and teachers of the law heard this and began looking for a way to kill him, for they feared him, because the whole crowd was amazed at his teaching. When evening came, Jesus and his disciples went out of the city, and in the morning, as they went along, they saw the fig tree withered from the roots. Peter remembered and said, "Look, Rabbi, look! The fig tree you cursed has withered." "Have faith in God," Jesus answered. "Truly I tell you, if anyone says to this mountain," now what mountain are they on? Mount of Olives. Now it's not like Mount Hood. It's a hill. Okay, it's about 200 to 300 feet above Jerusalem. So that's a hill. Truly I tell you, if anyone says to this mountain, go throw yourself into the sea, and does not doubt his heart, but believes that what they say will happen, it'll be done for them. Therefore I tell you, whatever you ask in prayer, believe that you have received it, and it will be yours. And when you stand praying, isn't that interesting? Why didn't he say when you kneel in prayer? Well, apparently during the time, the Jewish tradition of the culture was to stand and pray. You can still kneel. Yeah. If you hold anything against anyone, forgive them, so that your Father in heaven may forgive your sins. Interesting. So what do I take from all that? Cursing a fig tree, going by and seeing it dead. Now, when I was a little younger, I used to do what was called children's church. And we were attending at the time a large church, hundreds of people. And I would come up to the front and sit down, and I would say, anybody 7 years and younger, come and join me. And so I'd have this horde of kids around and a lot of mics so we could hear what they said, because that was hilarious usually. And I would give an object lesson. If you go to the Old Testament, you'll find lots of object lessons. They use it a lot. I believe Jesus was using this fig tree as an object lesson. This is where my botany study comes in. I had to look up fig trees and find out, what's going on here? Well, apparently the way it works is, now this is during Passover time, when this all happens with Jesus. So it's like in the springtime, March, April, and that time. And apparently during that, the fig season is not until the fall. I guess you don't harvest figs until the fall there in Palestine. But if you see a fig tree in full foliage and you go over to it, you should find these little miniature figs that are actually edible. I guess they're not quite as good, but they're edible. Now, you can eat those. But if you leave them, they will turn into big figs, and you can harvest them in the fall. Well, apparently, if they don't have foliage, then they're not going to have those little figs. But if they do have foliage, they should have the little figs. This one did not. Jesus went in to a place that he said was a place of prayer. Had all the trappings of being God's house, but they were not producing any fruit. Now, just to give you an idea of this, again, my history background. When you made that trip to Jerusalem, you had to go uphill, remember? You go uphill quite a bit. You didn't always take an animal with you. So when you got there, for the sacrifice, you had to buy an animal. And let me tell you, you paid for it. Or if you brought an animal, some of the priests would say, well, that animal's not quite perfect, but we have one right here in the back. We'd be glad to do that. Okay, and they'd pull their money out and they'd go, oh, I'm sorry. We don't take that money here. You'll have to go over there and exchange that money. The exchange rate during the time was about a 2 days' man's wage to just exchange the money. They were making money. This is a great deal. The historian, I think it's Josephus, I can't remember, I'm not saying that right, but he was a Roman historian at the time. He said that typically they killed 250,000 lambs during this time. That's a lot of lambs. Now that's not talking about doves, because people couldn't afford a lamb, so they would use a dove sometimes. So you can see that it had all the trappings. Now, just so you know, Ryan, can you put that picture of the temple up that I got? I'm not sure how. Yeah, okay, this is the temple. And this part right in here was their courtyards. This is called the Gentiles' courtyard. And this is where they had turned it into a livestock area. So all this area, which if you, in terms of football fields, is about the size of 5 football fields. It's a big area. And then in the inner, you have what's called a women's temple, and then I think a women's court and a Jewish court, and then this is the Holy of Holies. So people would come in, where's my pointer? There it is. People would come in, go up in here, and when they got into here, that's when the money changers and the guys selling would get on them and tell them they had to do certain things. So Jesus cleared them out. He was really upset about that. So going back to the fig tree, I think, because he was so upset with what was going on in the temple and not being fruitful that he was giving an object lesson with this, because he goes on to say, may no one ever eat fruit from you again. So, we come to the last part that I want to talk about today. In the morning, when they left, he talked about mountains. Now, I don't believe he meant that we are to move mountains. I think the Mount of Olives is still there, so no one has moved it. But I think the second half of that is where he wants us to focus, and that was where he tells us, whatever you ask in prayer, believe that you will receive it and it will be yours. Now that is if your heart is right and you're producing fruit. And when you stand praying, and if you hold anything against it, forgive. Now he's pretty ticked off at all the Pharisees, don't you think? They're trying to kill him. But he's now talking about forgiveness. That's my Lord. And boy, am I fortunate, because he has forgiven me. Me. So my questions. I have another verse here. I believe it's found in Galatians. But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, forbearance, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Against such things there is no law. Now, does my life demonstrate fruit? So I went through this whole study and came down to these 4 things that I have to ask myself. Am I allowing God to use me? Am I allowing his power to be demonstrated through my weaknesses? Am I too concerned about rules versus relationship? Not the rules aren't important. I mean, I was a vice principal. Am I demonstrating the fruits of the Spirit? And finally, am I forgiving as God had forgiven me? I want to see if I can read this poem that I put down here. It was written by G.K. Chesterton. And let's see if you can figure out who he's talking about here. When fishes flew and forests walked, and figs grew upon thorn, some moment when the moon was blood, then surely I was born. With monstrous head and sickening cry, and ears like errant wings, the devil's walking parody on all 4-footed things, the tattered outlaw of the earth, of ancient crooked will, starve and scourge, derive me. I am dumb. I keep my secret still. Fools. For I also had my hour, one far fierce hour and sweet. There was a shout above my ears and palms before my feet. Chesterton was talking about the donkey who was carrying Jesus on his back. Lord bless you.